This happened to me when I was in 4th grade. I am now 42. The internet as we know it wasn't around back in those days. So unfortunately I don't have any news articles to corroborate my story. But I have a very vivid memory of what happened that day. The day that my friend nearly lost her innocence and possibly her life. Here is the backstory. I have always had this very weird habit that I still do to this very day. I don't know what causes it, but I've always walked on my tiptoes. When I would go to school, I would usually get picked on a lot for this. No matter how much I tried walking flat-footed, I always ended up back on my toes. This led my family to believe that I was destined to be a ballet dancer. As much as I love to dance, I was also a tomboy that preferred climbing trees to wearing dresses. So when my mother, who worked 2 jobs, took me to the community center and signed me up for ballet classes, I thought I would definitely have to learn how to like dresses. The dance instructor's name was Mulaney. She was impressed by my skills but wasn't crazy about my height or my parents' economic status, as this was a very expensive class. At the end of my audition, I was told that I was too tall and awkward. It was a nice way of building up a young girl's confidence. When I exited the classroom and entered the hallway, I heard Mulaney say under her breath that she would not teach poor kids. I stopped mid-stride and turned around. "Excuse me?" And that's when she replied, "I don't teach trailer trash, okay?" My face became so red that my ears were purple. At that moment, I decided that I would knock her on her pompous ass. Before I could react, that's when I felt a hand on my shoulder, followed by a man's voice. "That's a fighter in you. Have you ever thought about trying out karate?" Mr. Diaz was a well-known and respected karate instructor in our county. He wanted me to try out his class and even offered to take me in at no charge. I would be his first girl, but he saw my potential, and I still owe him a lot for this. When I first started training, he noticed my tiptoed footing, and rather than mock me for it, he showed me how to turn them into weapons, as my legs are, to this day, still solid muscle from my calves to my thighs, and I kick harder than a mule. It was around this time that our small town on the coast of North Carolina was being terrorized by a man who had been abducting young girls. He would take them, have his way with them, and when he was done, he would bind their hands together, blindfold them before crossing into another town and dropping them off in the middle of the night. He was a sick bastard. He didn't kill any of his victims, but his MO suggested that he was becoming more and more violent with each incident. Mr. Diaz changed his lessons for a week or 2 and taught us how to use our momentum against attackers to get away. Eyes, nose, groin, and face. He said that if you were attacked, we should try our best to claw and scratch their face and eyes. Not only would this have the chance of blinding them, but it would also make them easy to identify after the fact. More importantly, he emphasized the buddy system. He told us not to scream the R word, because unfortunately, while many people want to stop that from happening, he also said people don't want to see it, and carry that mental image around in their heads. We should scream, "Fire," or "I lost my arm." He said that as silly as the last one sounds, it works. People are compelled to look at a fire, but even more so if someone's arm is falling off. Okay, so now on to the day in question. I was in 4th grade, and the year was 1990, springtime. At the time, I was with my best friend, who we'll call Jenny. Jenny and I decided to take a little walk around the neighborhood we lived in. This neighborhood had 2 main entrances, and formed a circle with 2 parallel streets in the middle. Homes were lined along each road, no more than 1.5 acres apart, some even closer. It was very easy to come into one entrance, leave out the other, and not be seen by anyone, even if you were paying attention to the vehicles that were passing through. This was also back when we kept the time by looking at the streetlights. The rule was when the streetlights come on, your ass better be on your way home. Ginny and I were on the main road heading towards the back. We were just being a couple of young girls talking about boys that we liked and the boogeymen that had been terrorizing our state. A girl that we knew named Kelly had been the latest victim. She was turned from a social butterfly into a psych ward irregular. She even tried to take her own life at one point. As we were talking about this, I remember looking over my shoulder and seeing an unfamiliar car approaching us very slowly. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The car was a Pontiac with a faded maroon or burgundy color. The driver almost reminded me of Jeffrey Dahmer. He wore these thick, red-rimmed glasses, had tight blonde, curly hair, and had a smile that made my skin crawl. His window was down already, and he stopped the car beside us. "Hello, girls. I'm trying to pay my electric bill, and I can't seem to find the office anywhere. Can you tell me how to get there from here?" Coincidentally, the one electric company in our town wasn't even a mile away from our neighborhood. In fact, I could have walked straight through the woods and shown up at the front doorstep. The only way to pay to turn on the service was in the office itself. Again, this was a small town back in the early 90s. The driver continued, saying that he had to get there to avoid his electricity shutting off. Knowing that he had to have been there before, I stated, "It's where you paid to have it turned on, so just go there." That's when I noticed an open map beside him on the passenger seat. He explained that his mother had been the one to turn on the electricity, and he was new to the area and had just come back from deployment. Something that struck me as odd was that his hair was a bit too long for being in the military, and he didn't have a sticker for getting on base. There are 2 military bases by us, Camp Lejeune and Cherry Point. Both of my grandfathers served in the military. Can you please just show me it here on the map?" He beckoned Ginny over to his car. Ginny was obviously unaware that something was off. I looked around and saw that no one was outside, and I quickly turned my attention back to Ginny and the man. The voice of Mr. Diaz echoed in my head. "Fight if you can't fly. Something bad will happen to Ginny if you don't." As soon as Ginny gets close enough, a look of pure evil forms on the man's face. Imagine seeing a human transforming into a demonic creature. That's the best way I can describe it. "Thanks, sweetie. Just point it out for me right here." He locks eyes with mine and gives me a sickly smile. That's when I quickly grab Ginny. "Wait! Don't lean in!" Jenny's scream echoed across the street, as I look up and saw that the man had reached over the passenger seat and had a hold of her arm. The car slowly began to roll forward as he struggled to pull her in. I yelled as I wrapped my arms around Jenny's upper body. I then pulled back as hard as I could, and I knew it was going to hurt like a bitch once I fell onto the asphalt, but that was okay, as long as I still had a hold of Ginny. We both hit the road, and it hurt like hell, as I predicted. By this time, some of the neighbors heard us screaming, and had exited their homes. I pulled Ginny to safety as the car peeled away. One of the bystanders was the mother of my friend Brandon. She got the tags, and a detailed description of what the driver looked like and his car. The man that we encountered that day was the monster who had been preying on young girls in North Carolina. I don't recall his name. My mother made every effort to keep me sheltered before this incident, and it just got worse after this. Now that I'm a mother myself, I can understand better now. She was proud of me and my actions that day. Ginny was also very grateful, and I'm glad to say that she's still doing well. The girl that I mentioned earlier, Kelly, serves as an example of what could have become of her if I hadn't intervened that day. Kelly has had a rough life and doesn't really speak to anyone anymore. I don't know all the details, but the monster ended up being caged. The descriptions of the car and the driver gathered from my neighborhood aided in his apprehension. I often think back to that day at the community center, where I was scoffed at by someone who thought I wasn't worth the investment. But against all odds, Mr. Diaz saw the potential in a tall, awkward girl who walked on her tiptoes. He was the guiding voice in my head that day, and if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have been able to save Ginny.
When I was around 18, I had gotten let go from my job as a part-time retail associate in Iowa City, Iowa. The reason for my termination was because the company was going bankrupt and couldn't afford to pay their employees. At the time, my parents made me pay rent and other expenses, and because I no longer had a job, I had to find a new one. Searching for a job was a hassle, and it didn't help that there weren't many jobs that were part-time. On top of that, I was also a part-time college student, which only added to the stress. Weeks had passed, and I still hadn't found myself a stable job. However, that was until one of my friends had called me, wondering if I could watch his dog as he was going on vacation that week. The reason he chose me was because the sitter who originally watched his dog had recently moved 3 states away and he couldn't find anyone else. The pay was $600 for 3 days, which was still enough to get by, but meant I would still have to find another job soon. Desperate for pretty much any pay, I accepted his offer and agreed to look after his dog. His dog's name was Jem. She was a gorgeous saddlebag German Shepherd with the personality of a teddy bear. Of course I was intrigued. I had arrived to his house where he had left a list of all the rules. Feed her at this time, let her out every 2 hours, give her walks, etc. Basically the usual responsibilities when owning any dog. Caring for a dog may seem easy, but it gets stressful after a while when you constantly have to let them out. The first night went smoothly with no accidents and had gotten done every rule on the list. However, that was until the second night of dog sitting, where something happened that would completely shock me. For some context, it was around 8 or 9 p.m. I had ordered some food and was watching a movie with Jem laying next to me. At one point during the movie, she sits up and perks her ears while tilting her head, as if she saw or heard something. The house was next to somewhat of a wooded area, so I had figured it was possibly a squirrel or some other critter. Soon after though, she started looking around and began barking in the direction of the hallway. Almost immediately, she jumps down from the couch and runs to the hall. At this point, I started to get a little worried as I didn't know what she could possibly be barking at. Curious, I follow her and see that she's barking at the door that led into the basement. I didn't even dream of opening that door and instead pulled her away. However, she wouldn't comply and pushed the door open, fleeing down the stairs. Darkness filled the basement, and so I get out my phone to help light my way down. This was before Apple had built-in flashlights, so I used my screen to illuminate whatever was down there. After feeling around for it, I find the light switch and see Jem sitting by a small closet door. This was one of those closet doors with the see-through ridges, so I was able to slightly see inside. Ever so carefully, I approached the door and pulled Jem away, but not before taking a quick look inside. Staring back at me was an eye. Pretending not to notice, I drag her out of there and run to the living room to call the police. I tried my absolute best to whisper into the mouthpiece as I didn't want to make any noise. However, even with me being so quiet, it didn't help as Jem was still barking, As I'm on the phone with the operator, I begin to hear someone coming up the wooden steps from the basement. The person slowly knocks, as if it were a way to frighten me even more. All the while, Jem was barking her head off, trying to break down the basement door. The sounds of sirens being heard in the distance was music to my ears as they drew closer. All the while, I hear the person down there start running down the stairs and hearing a door open. Fortunately, police were fast to respond as they arrived to the house in minutes. As it turns out, police had found what appeared to be some secret room in the basement. Me, nor my friend, had any acknowledgement of this room and didn't even know what it was for. Our best guess was that it was some sort of wine cellar that was used back then. My friend paid me extra for the trouble, and I never dog-sat for him again. I'm not sure if police ever found the man, or the possibility that he's still out there somewhere. The scariest part about this is that there was reason to believe the man had been hiding in that room for months. Inside were stolen items, beer cans, food, and even a sleeping bag. My friend had since moved cities recently as him and his family couldn't shake off the paranoia. This just goes to show you that you can't even enjoy the safety and comfort of your own home.
This happened in late October of last year in Ottawa, Ontario. I was visiting my old city to see my parents, which is always a strenuous endeavor. So I generally try to be in their house as little as possible when I'm over. To kill some boredom one night, I decided to go for a jog around the neighborhood I grew up in, around 10:30 p.m. I was really pushing myself as I quit drinking and was desperately trying to burn off the excess belly fat from being drunk and lazy during lockdown. I ran basically a huge circuit around the neighborhood, taking me through 3 parks. The third park I had to run through has no streetlights. It has one right in the middle, but Ottawa has a thing where random lights shut off, and this alternates across the city's power grid to save money and electricity. 9 times out of 10, it isn't shining. Now, this park is extremely dark, especially on a quiet October night with clear skies and dry ground. The road leading into it is well illuminated. This is a quaint, quiet, peaceful suburb. There has been some sketchy stuff that has happened in this little suburb, though. For example, just a 6-minute walk from my parents' house was one of the biggest drug busts our city has ever seen. Some gang with automatic illegal weapons, the whole shebang. There were also a couple of stabbings in other areas, but very spaced apart and generally resolved by the law immediately. All in all, it's a very quaint, safe, and clean place to raise a family. If I ever have kids or retire, Canada would be an ample place to do it. I have never once felt unsafe, especially in the neighborhood my parents lived in, as it's full of some very nice houses. Through the darkness, I entered the park and passed through the first part of it, which is a play structure meant for little kids. Pretty much just a wooden mini house that's next to a bouncy spring. This leads to a bigger part of the park with a basketball court, jungle gym, and a much larger play structure with a big green triceratops made of plastic in the sandbox. All this eventually leads to a path that runs behind my old elementary school. At the end of this path is my street. I almost finished my run, running through the dark, spooky park, as I have passed through hundreds of times before. Now, I got into the habit of falling asleep to creepy stories and have been watching a lot of horror movies lately. As I'm breaking into the blackness from the adjacent street, leading into the park, I am on the fence about taking a break and walking, but I remember I was trying to push myself. I carry on as I think, jokingly to myself, "Gee, I sure hope nothing spooky happens." but as I am rounding the corner to the other half of the park, I heard a distant scraping sound. I noticed a light from somebody's cell phone shining in the sandbox. As I ran closer, I heard this scraping getting louder. I got even closer, and I noticed through the moonlight that it is a man holding one of those hard rakes with the sharp tines, grooming the sandbox. Now, some internal intuition told me that I know this is super weird. Why is there some guy grooming the sandbox at almost 11 p.m. with a flashlight? As I approach further, however, I notice it isn't just a man holding a sharp rake. It's a man wearing an all-black sweatsuit with the hood up and a white hospital mask. He is standing underneath the play structure, using the tines of the rake to push a pink horse with wheels on it back and forth, and so on and so forth. He heard the stride of my footsteps approaching, and his head jerked upright in my direction. He quickly moved out from underneath the play structure and shined the light on me, right into my eyes. This is really weird, I thought to myself as I flashed him an utterly exhausted, awkward wave. I have asthma, and my quads and lungs are giving out. I try super hard to up the pace, because I am fairly creeped out at this point. In a flash, he kills his light, and I cannot see a single thing anymore. My heart jumps into my throat, and I am very tuckered out at this point, ready to collapse. I heard a soft shuffling in the sand as I passed him, followed by rapid footsteps in between my strides getting closer and louder. Instantaneously it clicks that this guy is charging me with the rake. It's crazy what fear and adrenaline can do, because I went from 0 to 100 real quick, sprinting faster than I would be able to normally. My whole body is burning, especially my lungs, as I cleared the park onto the well-lit path. I was moving so fast and panting so loud, I couldn't even tell if he was following me or not. I didn't look back. I cleared the end of the path and saw some guy getting out of his car. With him as my witness, I turned around, panting myself to death and wheezing. He was gone. I walked back to my street and went into my house, hacking up disgusting amounts of phlegm, absolutely drenched in sweat. I avoided telling my parents this story at first, just to avoid their reaction, but everyone else in my life knew pretty quick. I don't care for police, so calling them wasn't even something that crossed my mind. Later, when I reconnected with an old friend, one who never left Ottawa, she informed me that my old elementary school converts to a homeless shelter at night. They set up cots in the gymnasium and kicked them out at 6 a.m. Her reaction was to rationalize that it was probably a mentally ill, homeless person who was bored and couldn't sleep. But what if he had a different intention? Was he waiting for a jogger to pass by? Was he trying to scare people just for the fun of it? Or was he really in a violent mood? I guess I will never know.
This took place when I was only 7 years old. Back then, my parents would always drop me off at my grandma's house on the weekends. I always looked forward to staying with her. We would always go for walks around the neighborhood and talk to the people that she knew. My grandmother was always a very religious person, and we went to church with many of the people in her neighborhood. It was a very friendly community. They would often host garage sales on the weekends during the warmer months, which usually had decent turnouts. On one weekend, my parents decided to go to one of the garage sales with us. I was super excited. We usually just like to look around and rarely would buy anything. Eventually, we got to a house that had boxes of toys lined all the way down the driveway. The sale was happening at a house that we had never been to before, and we didn't know who lived there. Once I saw all the toys, I thought I had just won the lottery. While I was busy sorting through the newly discovered treasure, my grandma and parents were a few yards away looking at some dishes and furniture. and making conversation with some of the other people there. An older man, who looked to be around 60, approached me and watched me sort through the boxes with a smile on his face. "My, what a pretty young woman you are. Do you like toys?" I eagerly said yes, not thinking anything of it. I was about to leave to go ask my mom if I could buy a toy horse that I found. But before I could go, he said that he would let me have it for free and gave it to me with a grin on his face. He started picking a few other toys out of the boxes and handing them over to me, insisting that I could have all the toys I wanted. He told me that he had way more toys inside of his house that I could play with as well, and that I should go with him. Before I knew it, I was being led into his house. My mom then came up behind me and pulled me away from him, and then asked what the hell was going on. She was furious, holding me tightly and staring daggers at the man. She must have seen what was happening just in time and intervened. My dad and grandma were right behind her. The man said nothing while my mom and grandma started screaming at him, and this caught the attention of every other bystander, and everyone was immediately suspicious. I don't remember what was said, because my dad scooped me up in his arms and took me back to the car. I remember my grandma calling the police before we left. I didn't understand the gravity of the situation at the time. I found out many years later that the man had gone to the same church as my grandma and had participated in a lot of the events hosted by the church, including the youth events. Apparently, the police found loads of child pornography on his computer and was sent to prison shortly after. I'm 19 now, and it still creeps me out thinking about what could have happened to me if my mother didn't see what was going on. Thank God she did.
When I was about 15, my family and I moved into a large house. It was a relatively new home with 3 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, a garage, and even a large basement. Both of my parents were in the upper medical industry and worked several hours of the week. This meant that I would be home alone for the majority of the time while they were gone. I love staying alone as I like to think of myself as mature and adult-like. At the time, we lived in somewhat of a rural area of Knoxville, Tennessee. Those who have been to or live in Knoxville will probably relate to what I'm talking about. While it was a nice city, the crime rate was high, and during this story, I got a taste of what that looks like. One evening, I had come home from school and my parents were at work. Unfortunately, this was around the time where COVID was still rampant, so my parents had to work extra. 15-year-old me immediately hops onto Call of Duty to cure my boredom. I play some matches for a few hours or so before going up to my room and taking a nap. I'd say I slept for a good 2 hours or so before I awoke to a noise from the kitchen. Looking back, it kinda sounded like a clanking noise you'd hear when moving stuff around. I wake up and take a look at my clock. It was around 7 p.m. I was genuinely annoyed from this noise and put on my slides and went downstairs to see what it was. I ever so slowly turned the corner and what I saw chilled me to the bone. There, in the kitchen, was a woman going through our fridge. She had her back toward me, so she couldn't see me or know that I was there. To provide a little more detail, she was not at all a pleasant-looking woman. She looked homeless, and looking back, I'm pretty sure she was. She wore torn shorts, a tank top, and some sort of wristband. I put my hands over my mouth and slowly went back upstairs. As much as I wanted and needed to call the police, I couldn't as the only home phone we had was near the kitchen. Instead, I thought of another idea. My parents were friends with the neighbors from down the road, so I'd figured I'd go there and call the police. Now, I obviously couldn't have gone through the front door, so I did what anyone else would do. I opened my bedroom window and climbed out while gathering up the courage to fall. When I finally did, I hit the ground with only a sprained ankle and made my way over to the neighbors where I explained what happened. They, of course, instantly let me in to use their phone to call 911. In the meantime, they made a call to the hospital my parents worked at. The police ended up coming a lot faster than I thought and entered my house. Within a minute, they came out with an old, tired, lanky woman in handcuffs. However, she didn't try to get away or resist arrest. She seemed somewhat neutral about it, as if she had accepted her defeat. As it turns out, my theory was correct after all. She was a dangerous homeless woman who had broken into several homes in the area. My parents had come home soon after, where they had spoke with the police, where they then recommended we get cameras. And that's exactly what we did. The next day, my dad went out and installed a high-tech security system around the house. Surprisingly enough, the story didn't end there. It wasn't until a few nights ago where I had brought up the incident to my mom and asked if she remembered about it. Her eyes went wide with this look of fear and worry. When I asked what the matter was, she sat me down, held my hands, and said she was going to tell me something I didn't know. When her and my dad were talking to the cops that day, the cops had mentioned something that would shock them to their core. When they had entered my house, they had found a woman standing outside of my bedroom door. In her hand was one of our kitchen knives that she appeared to have been gripping tightly. Let's just say that if I hadn't jumped out of my window, things probably wouldn't have ended well for me. Thankfully, we hadn't had any break-ins as of today, and I hope it stays that way.
Back in 2001, I worked for a major home improvement warehouse. Let's just say the company I worked for had a thing for the color orange. By then, I had been with the company for about 8 years. My previous position was with HR, an assistant to the regional and store managers. The company eliminated that position, so I asked to be transferred to the RTV department, which stands for Return to Vendor. The girl who was working in that position gave her 2 weeks' notice, so the timing was perfect. The job was to work with the different vendors to get credit back to the store for defective merchandise. Our company had a pretty liberal return policy back in 2001, and some people brought back some strange things like garbage disposal units infested with maggots, old plug-in drills that weren't even being manufactured, you could always tell by the serial numbers, defective lawnmowers, and half-put-together shelves. I've seen it all. My RTV cage, as they called it, was located in the receiving department at the back of the store. It was a 12-foot-high chain-link fence with a swinging door entrance, which I would lock when I would go on lunch break or checked out for the day. I had my computer up on a makeshift stand, where I would process the credits and have vendors sign off on them. You wouldn't be able to see into the cage from outside due to all the bins holding the defective merchandise. One day, a vendor came in for some defective molding. I was standing at my computer with my back towards the guy as he inspected the merchandise. Both the product and mine, apparently. He then told me, "I'll give you credit for everything here." I was about to turn around and say, "Awesome, thanks," but was surprised with a flesh-colored, wrinkled, phallic-shaped hardware hanging out of his zipper. And he just stood there with his hands on his hips, so that I knew it didn't just fall out. I turned around back to my computer, and I felt faint. I thought, Did that just happen? Without turning back around, I handed him the RTV paper to sign, and he said, "See you in a couple weeks." I took some time in the cage to compose myself, and then walked to the manager's office and informed him about the situation. I also called the MOD. They like their acronyms. And his reply was, "Well, what do you expect?" And then started laughing. Since this was 20 years ago, I'll go ahead and say that I was pretty cute back then. Tan, fit, always had my hair and makeup done. No matter what I looked like, I didn't expect that from someone I had to do business with. The MOD insinuated that I should expect and accept treatment like that from time to time, and they weren't going to do anything about it. I called the company that the hot dog flasher worked for, and they said, "We'll look into it." Fast forward a few weeks later, and a coworker approached me and asked, "Did you hear? That molding dude did the same thing to a cashier. Now he can't come back into the store anymore." So, that son of a bitch didn't get fired? Apparently not. Looking back on this whole thing, I should have sued them. I'd probably be rich by now. Maybe I should have just laughed and said, "That's all you've got? I've seen bigger ones on newborn babies." But hindsight is always 20/20. In the moment, I froze, because that was the last thing I ever expected to happen.
I was 12 and my older sister and I were home alone for the weekend. I was waiting for a friend to pick me up and getting restless. There was a knock on the door. Thinking it was her, I ran to answer it without checking through the peephole. A man was standing there with a clipboard and he said he needed to check our gas meter. I was entrenched in the disappointment of my friend still not having arrived yet. So I just told him, "Yeah, sure. Whatever you need to do." I didn't notice at the time, but he wasn't dressed as a city official. He had a green and purple shirt with bold stripes, kind of like the host of Blue's Clues. He came in and immediately went upstairs to where our bedrooms were and walked into the open door of my room, the typically girly girl room with pink and glitter. Thank God my sister came down the stairs at the exact same moment and said, "Oh, is that Daphne's dad? Why is he going upstairs?" And I complained about how Daphne wasn't here yet, and was going on and on about how unreliable she was. And then my sister cut me off. Wait. If Daphne isn't here, then who is that?" I said, he said he was here to read the gas meters. Her face turned white. She flung open the front door and dragged me out, hand clamped over my mouth protesting. She said, "Our gas meters are outside." Neither of us had a cell phone. It was the 60s. And obviously, we weren't going back in the house to call authorities on the landline. Then my ever so resourceful sister had a stroke of genius. A man was walking right by our house and she motioned him over. She called out loudly into the house, "Oh, Dad, it's good you're home. A man from the city is here to read the gas meters. He's upstairs." And just like she'd hoped, this man on the street said, "What are you talking about?" The man in the striped shirt bolted out of that house. The man on the street asked us repeatedly if we were okay, if we needed him to stay and wait in the yard with us until our parents got home. He was very sweet. We were so startled that we barely thanked him before slamming and locking the doors along with the windows. As irate as my sister was that I let someone in the house, she begged me not to call the authorities because my parents left her in charge and she worried she'd be in trouble. I didn't want to catch any heat from carelessly allowing some random guy inside, so I was on the same page. 3 weeks later, a girl in our community went missing. The same MO. She was home alone, and the authorities found the door open and no signs of forced entry. My sister and I discussed our options, but deep down we knew we had no choice but to come clean. We told the police everything. I don't know if it ever helped, but they did tell us they had reason to believe it was the same man. They also tracked down the man who helped us on the street. It turns out we already knew him. He worked in the butcher shop. We just didn't recognize him. He was lifelong friends with our family after that. Our parents were definitely mortified. They weren't angry with us, just glad we were okay. Though they did review all the rules of caution and didn't let us leave home alone for a while. They ended up finding that girl. Apparently she'd been held for a few days, then burned alive. They never caught that man, but fear not. He appeared to be in his early 30s in the 1960s, so any case he has to be dead by now. I just thank God every day for my sister's resourcefulness and quick action.
So this happened yesterday, and I'm still pretty shaken up. Just for some backstory, I'm a 25-year-old female, and my boyfriend and I both have jobs where we can work from home and in an office. I was extremely tired yesterday morning, so I decided to work from home as my boyfriend went into the office. So I was alone all day with just my dog and cat at home with me. The day was normal as any other workday from home that I've taken until about 1:30 p.m. This is where things took a turn. I had just hopped into a work meeting when my doorbell rang. We have one of those Ring doorbells with a camera, and it notifies my boyfriend's phone that someone's at the door. I texted my boyfriend, and I asked if he could check who it was, and he said it was an older man who looked kind of sketchy and did not answer the door. So I ignore the door and go back to my meeting. 20 minutes later, I'm done with my meeting, and I decided to check my phone. I always keep my phone on Do Not Disturb while I'm working, and as soon as I checked it, I noticed all of the calls and texts that I'd missed from my boyfriend. Panicked, I immediately called him back, and he frantically asked me why I haven't been answering. I told him I was in a work meeting, and he tells me to look out the window, as the man hasn't left our property yet. I very quietly walk over to the front windows of our house and peek out, and sure enough, the man's in our driveway. He had parked his old beat-up truck next to our car in our driveway, and he was looking back and forth very sketchily. He had on dirty jeans and a dirty gray tank top. I immediately run back to our bedroom, and at this point, my heart is pounding in my chest. I tried to comfort myself by just saying that maybe he had the wrong house, but no. The man began looking through our windows trying to see inside, and he proceeded to try and open our back gate, which was locked. As I mentioned earlier, I have a large dog, and at this point, my dog is snapping and growling at the front door. As I still had my boyfriend on the phone, and he was actively watching the man on the camera app on his phone, I asked him what I should do since I was in full panic mode and completely alone. "Call 911, he firmly said. I did as he said, and with shaky hands I called. While I waited for the police to arrive, I texted my mom to let her know of the situation, and she immediately dropped what she was doing and said she was on her way. The man was still snooping around the house and looking through our windows. At this point, I had no idea what his intentions were, and by the looks of it, they didn't seem good, and I was really afraid he would see me. As soon as the man saw the police coming down the road, he hopped in his truck and sped off. I ran outside to the officer, and at this point, my mom had arrived as well. In tears, I explained what happened, and thankfully my mom got the man's license plate number. The police took his license plate number as well as description, and they told me they'd be on lookout for him. I know this may not seem as scary as some of the other stories here, but when you're alone and there's a man looking through your windows and not leaving your property, you have no idea what his intentions are, and it's absolutely terrifying. I wasn't able to sleep last night because I was so terrified, thinking he would come back to try and finish what he started. I'm hoping the police call me with an update since we had the license plate number, and if they do, I will provide an update. And to the strange man who wouldn't leave my property, please don't come back again. This happened when I was 17. I'm 22 now, and still thinking about it haunts me to this day. I was at my house on a Friday night. My mother was out of town for the weekend visiting some friends, so I had the house all to myself for the weekend. That night, I invited my friend Dan over for the night, and we decided to watch a scary movie. We got some snacks and soda, and we then turned on my favorite horror movie of all time, which is Drag Me to Hell. The one where that loan officer denies an old woman's request for an extension on her mortgage, and she then gets a curse put on her, where she has to break it within 3 days, or she'll get literally dragged to hell. Anyways, about an hour into the movie, me and Dan were having a good time and laughing at random shit in the movie. I paused the movie because I had to go to the bathroom, and just as I walked into the bathroom, I saw out the window that the sky looked green. I knew that there was going to be a storm, but I didn't pay attention to it. So I did my business, washed up, and went to continue the movie. Well, after the movie was over, me and Dan got an alert on our phones. The alert said that there was going to be a tornado warning until 7:45 p.m. and to seek shelter now, and that the threat level was really extreme. We immediately left the house to get to the storm shelter in the trailer park. Yeah, I lived in a trailer park at the time, so we had to evacuate the trailer. Just as we got to the storm shelter, that was when all of the sirens started to go off and the wind started to get violent. The owner of the trailer park unlocked the shelter, and us and everyone else in the trailer park got inside of it. We went down to the basement and all huddled. About 10 minutes later, the power went out, and we could all hear the wind getting really violent, and what sounded like a freight train shook the whole building. It shook so violently that I actually thought it was going to collapse. I started crying, and I thought we were going to die. Me, Dan, and everyone else in the shelter started freaking out. There were 5 loud crashing sounds that came from outside. I was so terrified that I felt like I was going to shit myself. We then heard a loud roar of the tornado's wind from outside through the structure of the building. Then about 10 minutes of noise later, it stopped. We were then given the all clear. We all left the shelter, and from the damage we all saw, I couldn't believe it. To say the damage was crazy is an understatement. There were a few cars flipped upside down, a couple of trees were uprooted, and 3 houses were damaged. 2 others were completely leveled, and another house had a car crash into it. Me and Dan hugged each other tightly while crying hysterically, because we were really glad to be alive. We were probably doing this for about 15 minutes. Then we walked back to my house. Luckily, all it had was just a little bit of side damage. Dan also lived in the trailer park at the time. Dan's mom and sister said when they got back to their house, there was damage to the roof. I invited Dan to spend the night at my house tonight. He agreed since he was still terrified. His mom and sister were cool with it too. I know this isn't the typical story with a creeper, but it was still terrifying, and I will never forget that day. So this happened yesterday, and I'm still pretty shaken up. Just for some backstory, I'm a 25-year-old female, and my boyfriend and I both have jobs where we can work from home and in an office. I was extremely tired yesterday morning, so I decided to work from home as my boyfriend went into the office. So I was alone all day with just my dog and cat at home with me. The day was normal as any other work day from home that I've taken until about 1:30 p.m. This is where things took a turn. I had just hopped into a work meeting when my doorbell rang. We have one of those Ring doorbells with a camera, and it notifies my boyfriend's phone that someone's at the door. I texted my boyfriend, and I asked if he could check who it was, and he said it was an older man who looked kind of sketchy and did not answer the door. So I ignore the door and go back to my meeting. 20 minutes later, I'm done with my meeting, and I decided to check my phone. I always keep my phone on Do Not Disturb while I'm working, and as soon as I checked it, I noticed all of the calls and texts that I'd missed from my boyfriend. Panicked, I immediately called him back, and he frantically asked me why I haven't been answering. I told him I was in a work meeting, and he tells me to look out the window, as the man hasn't left our property yet. I very quietly walk over to the front windows of our house and peek out. And sure enough, the man's in our driveway. He had parked his old beat-up truck next to our car in our driveway, and he was looking back and forth very sketchily. He had on dirty jeans and a dirty gray tank top. I immediately run back to our bedroom, and at this point, my heart is pounding in my chest. I tried to comfort myself by just saying that maybe he had the wrong house, but no. The man began looking through our windows trying to see inside, and he proceeded to try and open our back gate, which was locked. As I mentioned earlier, I have a large dog, and at this point, my dog is snapping and growling at the front door. As I still had my boyfriend on the phone, and he was actively watching the man on the camera app on his phone, I asked him what I should do since I was in full panic mode and completely alone. "Call 911, he firmly said. I did as he said, and with shaky hands I called. While I waited for the police to arrive, I texted my mom to let her know of the situation, and she immediately dropped what she was doing and said she was on her way. The man was still snooping around the house and looking through our windows. At this point, I had no idea what his intentions were, and by the looks of it, they didn't seem good, and I was really afraid he would see me. As soon as the man saw the police coming down the road, he hopped in his truck and sped off. I ran outside to the officer, and at this point, my mom had arrived as well. In tears, I explained what happened, and thankfully my mom got the man's license plate number. The police took his license plate number as well as description, and they told me they'd be on lookout for him. I know this may not seem as scary as some of the other stories here, but when you're alone and there's a man looking through your windows and not leaving your property, you have no idea what his intentions are, and it's absolutely terrifying. I wasn't able to sleep last night because I was so terrified, thinking he would come back to try and finish what he started. I'm hoping the police call me with an update since we had the license plate number, and if they do, I will provide an update. And to the strange man who wouldn't leave my property, please don't come back again.
For a bit of context, this happened to me about a week ago in the middle of the night. I'm a 27-year-old male and live alone in a small one-bedroom house in our rural area of Idaho. I was never the type to enjoy cities, nor was I the type to be around a lot of people. I just wanted a nice and quiet life, which is why I chose Idaho. Just this past week, I experienced something while home alone that I just had to write about. It was around 8 p.m. and I was at home cleaning the house when I hear my washing machine ring, letting me know that my clothes were done. My washer and dryer are both located in the basement of my home, so I went down there while turning on the light when I noticed something odd. One of the shelves that had been up was now face down with tons of my tools scattered around the floor. This was strange as it was pretty sturdy. Why I didn't hear it fall over, I don't know, but I stand it back up and tend to my laundry. I take out my clothes and put them into the dryer, and the second I do, the shelf from behind me falls over and creates a loud crash. I instantly turn around to face the direction of where the shelf had fallen, and there, standing next to it, was a tall, lanky man with a disturbing grin. He wore a white shirt, baggy pants, and just simply looked dead inside, as if he were extremely tired. I wasn't sure what it was, but something about this man really creeped me out, and not to mention that he kinda looked like Elle from Death Note. The minute I laid eyes on him, I let out a, "Who the hell are you?" in a short, scared, angry tone. He gave no response and just kind of stood there looking at me, staring into my soul. Figuring he might have been in the possession of drugs, I calmly asked him if he needed help or was lost. Even with my calm approach, he still didn't talk or even move. Not knowing what to do, I call police and tell them my situation. They said they'd send someone over, but that it could take a while due to extreme weather conditions. After I had hung up, the man had still been staring at me with his baggy eyes doing seemingly nothing. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he simply turned around and walked back up the stairs and out the back door. I of course followed him, and he kept walking away from my house, disappearing into the night. There aren't any houses or other forms of civilization for a few miles, so I was confused as to who he was or how he got here. He hasn't been back since, and although it was a pretty creepy experience, I'm glad he's now gone.
For context, I'm a girl, and the story took place when I was 18 years old. At the time, I was living with my father, but he was working long shifts away from home, so I spent a lot of time alone. One day I was home alone and trying to study in my bedroom. It was around 7 p.m. and dark outside. I was used to studying alone like this with my headphones on. My bedroom was at the back of the house facing the garden, which has a gate at the back leading to a large field. It wasn't unusual to get distracted by the occasional noise at night because the fields were really popular with dog walkers. This time though, it was different. I was trying to focus on my homework when a bright light came streaming through the window. I peeked out expecting to see a person and their dog, but I couldn't locate the source of the light. I went back to what I was doing, assuming it was someone walking who'd accidentally shone the light at my window. The next night it happens again. A bright light through my window, specifically with no dog walker in sight. This time I was frustrated, and I questioned if it could be the same person being creepy or trying to see into my room as I kept the curtains open. I spent longer looking out the window this time, trying to figure out the source of the light. I soon realized it was coming from somewhere close. It was coming from my own garden, and the gate connecting to the field seemed to be open. My heart started beating really fast, and I didn't know what to do. I quickly texted my dad, saying that I thought someone was in the garden. He told me to make sure that all of the doors were locked, and that he'd be home as soon as he could. I snuck down the stairs as quietly as possible, not wanting whoever was outside to know I was there. I checked the front door, and thank God it was locked. I crept to the back door facing the garden, and just as I was about to check it, I then saw the handle going down, like someone was trying to open the door. Thankfully that door was locked too, but they did try a few times to open it. By this point, I was absolutely terrified and shaking. I heard them try and pull at the kitchen window as well, but they had no luck. I tried to get a look at the person, but all I could tell was that they were white and tall. It was too dark to pick out any features. They seemed to be getting frustrated now, and then started banging at the window like they wanted to force it to break or open. I looked towards the front of the house, and my dad's car still wasn't there, and I was getting worried. Then by some miracle, I heard my neighbor's back door open and their large dog barking loudly. They must have noticed the stranger and then let out their dogs to scare them away. And it worked. I haven't seen them around again. I've never been so thankful for my neighbor's loud dogs before, and now I always check the doors are locked, even more than I used to.